Marcus Brown, a 38-year-old man, was known among colleagues for his unwavering work ethic and calm determination. He controlled heavy machinery with precision, a skill honed over almost 2 decades in the construction industry. His reputation as a reliable excavator operator was undeniable. To his colleagues, Marcus was a man of few words and was content to let the rumble of his car speak for him. However, at home he was a different person, a devoted husband to Lorraine and a loving father to their 8-year-old daughter Casey. A few months prior, Marcus's life had taken a devastating turn. During a routine medical checkup, doctors discovered advanced lung cancer. The diagnosis was terminal, and the prognosis gave him less than 6 months to live. The news hit him like a sledgehammer. He sat in the sterile office, staring at the X-ray images, unable to reconcile the dark, spreading mass on the screen with the man he thought he was, a strong, hard-working provider. The doctor's voice seemed distant, muffled by the weight of his thoughts. Surgery was not an option, and aggressive treatment would only marginally extend his time. He left the clinic with a handful of pamphlets and a heavy burden he was determined to carry alone. Marcus made a deliberate decision to shield his family from the truth. He convinced himself it was an act of love, sparing them the pain of watching him deteriorate. Instead, he focused on securing their future. He took on extra shifts, sometimes working late into the night, even on weekends. His paycheck became his legacy, a tangible proof of his love for Lorraine and Casey. He began withdrawing from them emotionally, not out of indifference, but out of necessity. Marcus believed that by creating distance now, he could ease the blow of his eventual absence. Lorraine noticed the changes almost immediately. Her husband, once attentive and engaged, had become distant and preoccupied. Marcus used to relish the little moments, helping Casey with her homework, cooking dinner with Lorraine, or simply sitting on the porch in comfortable silence. Now, he spent most evenings locked in thought or mechanically scrolling through his phone. When he was home, his exhaustion was palpable. He rarely smiled, and his responses to her questions were clipped and perfunctory. The man she had known for years seemed to be slipping away, and she couldn't understand why. Marcus's physical appearance began to reflect the strain he was under. His once strong frame grew gaunt, and dark circles formed under his eyes. His hands, perpetually calloused from years of labor, trembled occasionally, a side effect of his declining health and relentless schedule. Despite the toll it took on him, Marcus never missed a day of work. His co-workers noticed his declining health, but attributed it to overwork. He dismissed their concerns with a practiced wave of his hand, muttering something about needing the money. Lorraine's mind spiraled with suspicions. She replayed the signs over and over, his late nights, his detached demeanor, the faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes one evening, a coincidence he hadn't noticed after working near a perfumery construction site. To her, the evidence seemed undeniable. Marcus was having an affair. The idea stung deeply. They had weathered so many storms together, financial struggles, family conflicts, even the loss of a pregnancy years ago. Lorraine couldn't fathom why he would betray her now, after everything they had endured. Casey, though young, was perceptive. She sensed the tension between her parents and often retreated to her room, burying herself in her books or drawing pictures of their family as it once was, happy and whole. Lorraine tried to shield Casey from her growing doubts, but her frustration often bled through. Conversations at the dinner table became strained, with Lorraine's pointed questions met by Marcus's terse replies. The warmth that had once filled their small home was replaced by an oppressive silence. Marcus, for his part, noticed Lorraine's suspicion but chose not to address it. He told himself that her misunderstanding was a small price to pay for protecting her from the truth. He avoided her probing eyes and deflected her questions, retreating into his work with a single-minded focus. The thought of leaving Lorraine and Casey unprepared haunted him. He opened a secret savings account, depositing as much as he could each week. He even considered selling some of his tools and equipment to add to the fund. The weight of his secret began to affect his judgment. On one occasion, Marcus narrowly avoided an accident at the construction site, his mind clouded by fatigue and the relentless drumbeat of his thoughts. His supervisor reprimanded him, warning that another mistake could cost him his job. Marcus nodded, apologetic but inwardly panicked. Losing his income would shatter his plan, leaving his family vulnerable after his death. As the weeks passed, the tension at home grew unbearable. Lorraine's suspicions hardened into certainty, and her resentment festered. She didn't confront Marcus directly, fearing what she might hear, but her actions became more passive-aggressive. She stayed late at work, avoided his touch, and began confiding in a coworker about her frustrations. Marcus noticed, but chose not to engage, convinced that his silence was the best course of action. Unbeknownst to either of them, their unspoken grievances were laying the groundwork for an explosive confrontation, one that would shatter the fragile balance Marcus had worked so hard to maintain. Lorraine Brown worked as a sales assistant in a modest clothing store located on the main street of their town. The job was not glamorous, but it was steady, and she took pride in contributing to the family's income. She had worked there for nearly 10 years, cultivating a reputation for her warm demeanor and attentiveness to customers. However, in recent months, her sunny disposition had begun to fade. Her coworkers noticed the change first. She seemed distracted, her smile strained, and her usual patience with difficult customers was wearing thin. The source of her unease was not a secret among the staff. Lorraine often confided in her colleagues during slow hours, sharing snippets of her growing suspicions about Marcus. He was coming home later than usual, sometimes after midnight, and his explanations were vague. His once affectionate gestures had disappeared, replaced by a cold, almost mechanical presence. To Lorraine, it felt as though her husband had become a stranger. Her co-workers, a mix of older women with strong opinions and younger ones eager for gossip, were quick to offer their theories. One comment, in particular, stuck with Lorraine: men who work late aren't always working. These words planted a seed of doubt that grew with each passing day. Lorraine began scrutinizing Marcus's behavior more closely, looking for signs of infidelity. She searched his clothes for unfamiliar scents, checked his phone for suspicious messages, and even noted the mileage on his truck. Despite finding nothing conclusive, her intuition told her something was wrong. She replayed moments from their recent interactions, dissecting every word and action. Why did he avoid her gaze? Why did he flinch when she touched him? The lack of clear answers only deepened her frustration. At home, the tension was palpable. Lorraine struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy for Casey's sake, but her efforts were faltering. The little girl, sensing the growing rift between her parents, had become quieter, retreating into her own world of books and drawings. Lorraine decided it was best to send Casey to her mother's house for a while, citing school holidays as the reason. In truth, she needed space to think and to confront her feelings without the added pressure of parenting. Around this time, Kevin entered her life. He was a frequent customer at the store, a man in his early 40s with a charismatic presence and an easy smile. Unlike Marcus, Kevin was openly complimentary, often lingering at the counter to chat with Lorraine. At first, she dismissed his attention as harmless flirtation, but as her doubts about Marcus grew, she began to see Kevin in a different light. He represented something she felt she had lost, a sense of being seen and appreciated. Kevin's timing was impeccable. On a particularly stressful day, he invited her out for coffee after her shift. Lorraine hesitated but ultimately agreed. She told herself it was innocent, just a chance to clear her head and enjoy an adult conversation. However, as the hours passed, she found herself opening up to Kevin in ways she hadn't with Marcus in months. He listened intently, offering words of comfort and understanding. His interest felt genuine, and Lorraine was drawn to him despite her lingering guilt. Their connection deepened over the following weeks. Lorraine began looking forward to Kevin's visits to the store, and their casual coffee dates turned into dinners. She rationalized her actions, convincing herself that Marcus's emotional withdrawal had left her no choice. For the first time in a long while, she felt desirable and valued. Kevin's attention became a refuge from the turmoil at home, a place where she could escape her suspicions and doubts. When Kevin suggested they take their relationship further, Lorraine hesitated but ultimately agreed. The decision was driven by a mix of anger and longing. She felt betrayed by Marcus and justified her actions as a response to his perceived infidelity. She convinced herself that what she was doing was not worse than what she believed Marcus was doing. At home, Lorraine's demeanor shifted. She became more secretive, hiding her phone and avoiding Marcus whenever possible. Her guilt manifested in small ways: burnt dinners, forgotten chores, and a short temper. Marcus noticed the changes but attributed them to her usual stress. Lorraine, however, was acutely aware of the thin line she was walking. Each lie she told and each secret she kept added to the growing weight on her conscience. The affair brought a temporary sense of relief, but it also intensified her turmoil. Lorraine began to dread the moments when Marcus was home, fearing that he might discover her betrayal. She avoided his questions and deflected his attempts to reconnect, further widening the gap between them. Kevin, meanwhile, grew more confident, suggesting they meet more frequently and in more intimate settings. Lorraine agreed, desperate to hold on to the fleeting happiness he provided, even as the walls of her carefully constructed life began to close in around her. Marcus Brown's decision to buy his wife a gift came after weeks of inner turmoil. He had spent hours at the construction site, operating the massive excavator with mechanical precision, but his thoughts were consumed by his impending death. The weight of his secret, coupled with the distance growing between him and Lorraine, had left him emotionally raw. Yet, he clung to the hope that a gesture of love could bridge the gap and restore some semblance of the life they once shared. He used a portion of his savings to purchase a gold ring, simple but elegant, adorned with a small diamond. To him, it symbolized their enduring bond and his gratitude for the years they had spent together. That evening, Marcus left the construction site earlier than usual, a rare occurrence given his relentless work schedule. He carefully placed the small velvet box in his pocket, checking it repeatedly during the drive home. The truck's engine hummed steadily as he navigated the quiet streets, his mind filled with imagined scenarios of Lorraine's reaction. He pictured her smile, the way her eyes would light up when she saw the ring. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope broke through his otherwise dark thoughts. As Marcus approached the house, he noticed something unusual. The front porch light, which Lorraine typically turned off after sunset, was still on. A faint glow emanated from the upstairs bedroom window. He parked the truck a few houses away, thinking it might be a surprise for him, a rare effort from Lorraine to rekindle their strained relationship. He stepped out of the vehicle, his work boots crunching softly against the gravel driveway, and approached the house with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Reaching the front porch, Marcus hesitated. He stood in the cool evening air, his fingers brushing against the velvet box in his pocket. Something felt off, though he couldn't articulate why. The house was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of the television or Casey's playful chatter. Slowly, he ascended the wooden steps, each creak of the boards amplifying his unease. Marcus peered into the living room window, but the space was empty. He circled the house, his heavy boots silent on the damp grass. As he reached the side of the house, he caught sight of movement through the upstairs bedroom window. At first, he thought he was mistaken, but as he focused, the scene became clear. Lorraine was in their bed, entangled with another man. The curtains were partially drawn, but there was no mistaking the intimacy of the moment. The man's silhouette moved with an ease that suggested he was no stranger to the space. Marcus stood frozen, his body tense with shock. The ring in his pocket, once a symbol of his love and sacrifice, now felt like a cruel joke. His mind raced, replaying every recent interaction with Lorraine, every late night, and every cold shoulder. The realization struck him with the force of a wrecking ball. While he had been fighting to secure their future, Lorraine had betrayed him. Yet, he did not lash out. Instead, an eerie calm settled over him, a numbness that dulled the sharp edges of his anger and pain. Without making a sound, Marcus retreated from the window. He moved deliberately, careful not to draw attention to himself. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained expressionless. He reached his truck and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He stayed there for several minutes, staring at the house. The glowing bedroom window seemed to mock him, a beacon of his failure to hold his family together. Marcus eventually started the truck and drove away, the engine's low rumble masking the storm brewing inside him. He did not return to the construction site immediately. Instead, he drove aimlessly, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him like the heavy machinery he operated daily. His mind oscillated between rage and despair, replaying the image of Lorraine and her lover over and over. He thought about Casey, about the life he had worked so hard to provide for her, and how it now seemed like a hollow effort. Marcus returned to the construction site under the cover of darkness, his mind consumed by a singular, unrelenting purpose. The empty lot was eerily quiet, save for the hum of distant traffic. The massive excavator stood at the center of the site, its steel arm glinting faintly under the sparse light of a nearby street lamp. It was a machine he had mastered over years of labor, a tool of creation and precision. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. He parked his truck and approached the excavator with measured steps, his boots crunching against the gravel. The keys were still in the ignition. He had left them there earlier that day, trusting in the isolation of the site. Marcus climbed into the operator's cab, his movements deliberate and devoid of hesitation. The seat, worn and familiar, felt strangely foreign as he settled into it. He gripped the controls, his hands steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. The engine roared to life, shattering the stillness of the night. Marcus adjusted the controls, maneuvering the excavator with the precision of a man who knew its every nuance. The machine moved forward, its treads grinding into the earth, leaving deep impressions in its wake. The sound was deafening, a mechanical growl that echoed in the silence. Marcus directed the machine toward the residential streets, its massive bulk an ominous presence against the quiet neighborhood backdrop. As he neared his home, the sight of the familiar structure stirred a volatile mix of memories and emotions. The house had once been a symbol of stability, a sanctuary for his family. Now, it stood as a monument to betrayal. The glow from the bedroom window was still visible, a taunting reminder of what he had witnessed earlier. Marcus brought the excavator to a halt just outside the property, the machine idling like a predator poised to strike. Without a moment's hesitation, Marcus engaged the controls. The excavator's arm lifted, its steel bucket gleaming as it arced toward the house. The first strike landed with a thunderous crash, shattering wood and glass. The sound reverberated through the quiet street, jolting awake the slumbering neighborhood. Inside the house, Lorraine and Kevin scrambled in panic, their cries muffled by the machine's relentless assault. Marcus heard them but felt nothing. His actions were methodical, driven by a cold, detached fury. The walls of the house buckled under the force of the excavator's repeated blows. Debris rained down in a chaotic torrent, filling the air with dust and splinters. The structure groaned under the strain, its frame collapsing piece by piece. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. They stood in stunned silence, their silhouettes outlined by the glow of porch lights. Some screamed, others fumbled for their phones to call the police. The scene was surreal, a tableau of destruction unfolding in slow motion. Marcus remained focused, his gaze fixed on the house as it crumbled before him. He was oblivious to the growing crowd or the flashing lights of approaching police vehicles. The machine continued its work, the mechanical arm rising and falling with ruthless efficiency. Inside the cab, Marcus's expression was blank, his features carved into an impenetrable mask. He felt no remorse, no regret, only a grim satisfaction. In his mind, he was meting out justice, obliterating the lies and betrayals that had tainted his life. As the house collapsed entirely, engulfed in a cloud of dust and debris, the police arrived on the scene. Officers shouted commands, their voices barely audible over the noise. Marcus finally ceased his assault, allowing the excavator to idle as he sat motionless in the cab. The machine loomed over the wreckage like a sentinel, its work complete. Marcus's hands rested on the controls, his grip slackening as the reality of his actions began to settle over him. The officers surrounded the excavator, weapons drawn, their movements cautious. Marcus made no attempt to resist. He climbed down from the cab with measured steps, his boots leaving prints in the debris-strewn yard. His expression remained unreadable as he allowed himself to be handcuffed and led away. The neighbors watched in stunned silence, their murmurs punctuated by the wail of sirens. The house, once a symbol of familial harmony, now lay in ruins, a testament to the destructive power of betrayal and rage. Marcus Brown was taken into police custody on the night of the destruction, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back as officers escorted him to a patrol car. The scene outside his ruined home was chaotic. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering in hushed tones, their faces illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights. The house was unrecognizable, reduced to a heap of timber, shattered glass, and dust. Lorraine and Kevin had been pulled from the wreckage, bruised but alive, their stunned expressions adding to the surreal atmosphere. Marcus remained stoic, his gaze fixed ahead as he was driven to the station. At the precinct, Marcus was processed and placed in a dimly lit interrogation room. The officers tried to extract a confession, but he remained largely silent, his demeanor calm, almost detached. When asked why he had demolished his own home, he finally broke his silence. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of his anguish. "I wanted to build a better future for them," he said, "but they destroyed it." The simplicity of his statement left the room in silence, the officers unsure of how to respond. It was not the outburst of a man driven by madness, but the measured words of someone who had reached his breaking point. As the investigation unfolded, the details of Marcus's life came to light. Detectives uncovered his meticulous financial planning, his long hours at the construction site, and the recent purchase of a modest but meaningful gift for Lorraine. These details painted a portrait of a man who had been driven by love and a sense of duty, only to have his world unravel in the face of betrayal and his terminal diagnosis. The discovery of his medical condition added a layer of complexity to the case, shifting public perception. What had initially seemed like an act of reckless violence began to be seen as the tragic culmination of a man's internal struggle. The trial was swift but emotionally charged. The prosecution portrayed Marcus as a dangerous individual who had put lives at risk, while the defense argued that his actions stemmed from profound psychological distress exacerbated by his terminal illness. Lorraine, called to testify, revealed the extent of her guilt and regret. Her testimony was marked by visible anguish as she recounted her growing suspicions about Marcus, her own infidelity, and her shock upon learning about his cancer. The court proceedings brought to light the fractured dynamics of their relationship, leaving the jury and spectators grappling with the moral complexities of the case. Despite the sympathetic portrayal of his circumstances, Marcus was convicted of multiple charges, including destruction of property and attempted manslaughter. The judge, acknowledging the mitigating factors, handed down a reduced sentence, but it was clear that Marcus's remaining days would be spent behind bars. As the verdict was read, Marcus showed no outward reaction. He accepted his fate with the same quiet resolve that had defined his actions throughout the ordeal. In prison, Marcus's health deteriorated rapidly. The stress of incarceration, coupled with the progression of his illness, left him weak and bedridden within months. Lorraine attempted to visit him, desperate to seek his forgiveness and make amends for her role in the tragedy. Marcus, however, refused to see her. He declined her letters and visitation requests, choosing instead to spend his final days in solitude. He wrote a single letter, addressed to his daughter Casey, expressing his love for her and his hopes for her future. The letter was delivered to Lorraine after his death, along with instructions for the disbursement of his savings. When Marcus passed away, the news sent ripples through the community. The tragedy of his life and death became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the destructive power of secrets and unspoken pain. Lorraine was left to grapple with the aftermath, raising Casey alone and carrying the weight of her actions. The money Marcus had painstakingly saved provided them with financial stability, but it could not erase the emotional scars left behind. Casey grew up acutely aware of her father's legacy. The story of Marcus's sacrifices and his ultimate unraveling shaped her worldview, instilling in her a determination to rebuild what had been lost. As an adult, she pursued a career in architecture, driven by a desire to create spaces that symbolized hope and resilience. One of her first projects was the reconstruction of their family home, a modern design that paid homage to her father's work and his unyielding love for his family. The house stood as both a memorial to Marcus and a testament to the enduring strength of those he left behind.